Racist taxi driver insults Snoop Dogg, but what happened next shocked everyone. The city bustled with its usual energy, the constant hum of traffic and distant chatter filling the air. It was a warm afternoon, the kind of day that made everything feel alive, the sunlight cutting through the tall buildings as it bounced off the asphalt. Snoop Dogg, dressed in his signature look, black leather jacket, sunglasses, and a white t-shirt, was in the back of a taxi, just another ride across town after a busy event. His thoughts drifted, his mind wandering, but his calm presence was unshakable. The driver, a middle-aged man in a crisp uniform, glanced at the rearview mirror every now and then. At first, he didn't recognize his passenger, but that didn't matter to him. His thoughts, as usual, were filled with complaints about the city, the people in it, and the way things had gone downhill. It wasn't long before he began to mutter to himself, but as time passed, those mutterings grew louder. People like him, the driver grumbled, his voice thick with disdain. They come into our neighborhoods, ruining everything. It's like they think they own the place. No respect for anyone, just walking around with their attitudes. Snoop, unfazed by the jab, kept his eyes on the city through the window, pretending not to hear. He had been in situations like this before, many times in fact, and it usually wasn't worth responding to. His zen-like composure had always kept him above such things. But today, there was something in the air that felt different. The driver continued, unaware that the man sitting behind him was none other than the world-famous Snoop Dogg. People just don't know what's good for them. Take a look around. The world's falling apart because of people like that. The driver spat, his words becoming more venomous by the second. His finger jabbed toward the rearview mirror, as if punctuating his judgment. And these celebrities think they can do whatever they want. It's like the whole damn city's being taken over. Snoop's eyebrow twitched. He could feel the negativity dripping from every word the driver spat. Slowly, he took off his sunglasses and placed them on the seat beside him, then leaned forward just a bit. He wasn't going to let it slide this time, not today. "Excuse me," Snoop said, his voice calm but unmistakably firm. "You know, I don't appreciate what you're saying." The driver glanced at him briefly in the rearview mirror, a slight frown forming. "What's that? You got something to say?" His voice was laced with challenge now, a touch of defiance creeping in. Snoop leaned back, his voice steady as ever. "Yeah, I've got something to say. I'm just curious where all that hate comes from. People like you, always talking down on others, especially people you don't know. What's that about?" The driver scoffed, his hands gripping the steering wheel tighter. "What I'm talking about is the truth. Look around. The world's a mess, and it's people like you who are part of the problem. Don't tell me it's not true." Snoop's eyes narrowed, but there was no anger in his gaze, just quiet observation. "You think I'm part of the problem?" he asked, his voice almost too calm for the rising tension in the car. The driver's tone grew harsher. "Yeah, I do. You people just get by on your fame, your money, and you leave us regular folks behind. Like it's all a joke to you." The words hung in the air like smoke. Snoop's lips curled into a small smile, but it wasn't one of amusement. It was understanding, mixed with something more insightful. He knew this was the moment to speak. "You got that all wrong," he said slowly. "It's not about the money, it's not about the fame. It's about respect and understanding. And the fact that you're sitting there making assumptions about me and others just shows you don't know what's really going on. You've got a lot of hate in you, but what's it really doing for you?" The driver was silent for a moment, then snorted. "You talk all high and mighty, but you don't know what it's like. You got everything handed to you on a silver platter. You don't know struggle." Snoop sat back in his seat, eyes still locked on the driver, unshaken. "You're right, I don't know your struggle. But I do know what it's like to face people who judge you without knowing the first thing about you. To be looked at like you don't matter just because you don't fit into their world. I get it, man. And I'm not here to say your struggle isn't real, but when you're taking it out on others, all you're doing is spreading that hate. It doesn't get you anywhere." The taxi driver snorted again, his eyes hardening. "You don't know me, man. Don't tell me what to do." Snoop's expression softened, a calmness taking over. "I'm not here to tell you what to do, but I'm here to show you that you don't have to carry that anger around. You don't have to spread it. You've got a choice." The car hit a red light, and the driver stopped, still silent, his grip tightening on the wheel. The silence stretched for what felt like eternity. The tension was thick, the driver's chest rising and falling with every breath, and Snoop, as cool as ever, sat in the back seat, his presence unflinching. Then the driver broke the silence. His voice was quieter now, almost sheepish. "You're not like I thought." Snoop leaned forward again, this time with a smile that reached his eyes. "You think I'm just some celebrity who doesn't understand, right? But it's not about what I have, it's about what we all could be if we started looking at each other like human beings." The driver exhaled slowly, rubbing his forehead. He wasn't quite sure how to process the change in the atmosphere. For a moment, he felt exposed. His anger, his bitterness, it all seemed so small in the face of Snoop's calmness. The driver, who had been spitting words of hate just moments ago, now found himself questioning them. "You ever feel like you just can't let go of the past?" the driver asked, his voice suddenly tinged with vulnerability. "Like you've just built up so much inside that you don't know how to stop it?" Snoop's eyes softened, and he nodded slowly. "Yeah, I feel that sometimes too. But you gotta let go of that weight. It doesn't help anyone, least of all yourself. You can't move forward if you're always stuck in the past." The driver glanced at him through the rearview mirror, the weight of Snoop's words sinking in. He wasn't sure what to say anymore. The defensive, aggressive side of him that had been running his mouth for so long was slowly being dismantled by the calm, steady presence of the man in the backseat. Suddenly, the driver's attitude shifted. "You know, I think I was wrong. I've been carrying this anger for so long, I didn't even realize it was hurting me. I'm sorry, man. I didn't mean to. I didn't know who you were." Snoop leaned back in his seat, looking at the driver with understanding. "It's all good. We all make mistakes. But the first step is recognizing them. You can't move forward if you keep holding on to what's dragging you down." The taxi driver nodded, visibly moved. "Yeah, I'm gonna think on that. I appreciate you not losing your cool. I've learned something today." As they neared Snoop's destination, the driver's voice came through again, this time softer, more sincere. "You know, I always thought people like you were just about the fame and money. I didn't realize you actually had something to teach." Snoop smiled, a knowing look on his face. "We all have something to teach, man. Sometimes it just takes the right moment to hear it." When the car finally stopped, Snoop stepped out, turning to the driver. "Take care of yourself, all right? Keep it real and remember what I said." The driver, now a changed man, nodded. "I will. Thank you, Snoop. I won't forget this." With a final nod, Snoop walked away, leaving the driver to reflect on the encounter. It had started with hate, but in the end, it was about understanding, growth, and the power of a calm voice in the face of anger. And as Snoop disappeared into the city, the driver sat in his car, a little wiser, a little more open, ready to change. As Snoop Dogg walked away from the cab, the cool city air felt refreshing against his skin. The rhythmic sound of his footsteps echoed down the sidewalk, blending with the hum of the city as it buzzed with activity. But his mind wasn't on the bustling streets or his next meeting. It was on the conversation he'd just had with the taxi driver. That unexpected exchange had stirred something inside him, a reminder of why he did what he did beyond the music, beyond the fame. It wasn't every day that he got to make a real impact like that. People saw him as a rapper, a celebrity, a businessman. But moments like these, when he could cut through the surface and reach someone on a deeper level, those were the moments that mattered most to him. He didn't do it for the attention. He did it because he knew, deep down, that everyone deserved a chance at change, no matter their past, no matter their mistakes. He stopped for a moment, leaning against a streetlight as he dug his phone from his jacket pocket. He wasn't going to be late for his meeting, but he had a feeling that this conversation was far from over. He sent a quick text to his manager, making sure everything was on track for his next engagement. As he tapped out the message, he thought about the driver. The man had seemed so hardened at first, so caught up in his own anger. But that had shifted, hadn't it? The words Snoop had spoken, calm but resolute, had reached him. It was more than just an apology from the driver, it was a realization. Snoop hit send and stuffed the phone back into his pocket. He hadn't really given the driver a second thought at the time, But now, as he continued to walk, he realized something about the power of his actions. They weren't just about changing minds, they were about showing people that growth was possible, even for someone as seemingly set in their ways as that driver. The days that followed were a whirlwind for Snoop. His schedule was packed with events, appearances, and meetings, all of which kept him in the public eye. But even with the fame and work, Snoop couldn't shake the encounter in the taxi. He couldn't stop thinking about it, especially when he saw the news the next day. A video had gone viral, capturing part of the heated argument between him and the driver. The clip had been filmed by a bystander, though only the first half of their conversation had been shared. The driver's racist remarks were clear, and in the footage, you could see Snoop maintaining his calm composure throughout the exchange. What happened next, though, shocked everyone. The news outlets, social media posts, and public reactions began to pour in, dissecting the moment. The surprise wasn't that Snoop had handled the situation with dignity and grace. It was that the taxi driver, the man who had first hurled racial slurs and judgment, had publicly apologized to Snoop in front of the city's press. The apology went viral too, and within a few days, it was all over the news. "I was wrong," the driver said, looking directly into the camera with a regretful expression. "I let my anger and hate cloud my judgment. What I said to Mr. Dogg wasn't right. I let my ignorance take the wheel, but I've learned that there's no place for that kind of thinking anymore. I'm sorry for what I said, and I'm going to do better." The video of the driver's apology, sitting outside his home with the sun setting behind him, was raw and authentic. He wasn't trying to win any points, he was simply acknowledging his mistake. And perhaps even more surprising was the fact that he had made his apology public. In a world where pride often trumps humility, this was something unexpected, something that hit people on a deeper level. Snoop watched the video from his hotel room later that day, the familiar hum of the city outside his window fading into the background. He hadn't expected that kind of reaction. He hadn't done it for the press, but he knew the impact of what had transpired in that cab. Seeing the driver take responsibility for his words, though, left him speechless. His phone buzzed on the table and he glanced at the screen. It was a text from his manager. "Did you see the news? The taxi driver went public with an apology. It's all over the media right now. You need to comment on this." Snoop didn't immediately reply. Instead, he thought about the whole situation. A public apology wasn't easy, especially for someone who had once been so filled with anger and hatred. But then again, this was more than just an apology. This was a public reckoning, an acknowledgement of change. It wasn't just the driver's redemption, it was a message for everyone watching that change was possible, that anyone, no matter their past, could move forward and grow. The message needed to be heard loud and clear, and Snoop knew it. He picked up the phone and began typing his response. "We're all works in progress. We all have things we need to work on. But growth is about recognizing our mistakes and doing better." The man took responsibility for his words, and that's something we should all aspire to. Change doesn't happen overnight, but it starts with the right mindset. He hit send and then leaned back in his chair, deep in thought. His statement wasn't just for the press. It was for everyone who was struggling, for anyone who had ever felt like they couldn't change. It was a message that everyone needed to hear, especially in a world so often divided by hate. The reaction from the public was overwhelming. Support poured in from across the globe, with people applauding Snoop for his maturity and compassion. His response was praised for its message of growth, understanding, and forgiveness. But what surprised people even more was the taxi driver's transformation. The media dubbed it a true moment of redemption. People shared stories about how they, too, had once been filled with hate and had learned to grow past it. But it wasn't just the media who noticed. In the following days, the driver's phone rang constantly. He received messages from people, some of whom he had once harbored contempt for, thanking him for his honesty, for his courage in confronting his own prejudices. Snoop, however, didn't want to be the center of the story. His attention was always on the message, never on his own role in it. But he did keep tabs on the progress the driver was making. He'd hear through mutual contacts about how the man was working with local organizations, taking active steps to combat his own biases. It was, in Snoop's mind, a beautiful thing. One afternoon, the taxi driver, whose name had now become public, reached out to Snoop through a mutual acquaintance. He asked if they could meet. Snoop agreed, and they arranged to meet at a local diner. When they sat across from each other, the driver, who now seemed a little older, a little wiser, looked at Snoop with gratitude in his eyes. "I don't think I ever properly thanked you," he said quietly. "You didn't just change my life that day in the cab. You gave me the courage to face myself, to admit where I'd been wrong. I've been trying to make up for my mistakes, but I owe it to you to thank you for what you did, for showing me that it's never too late to change." Snoop smiled, a soft chuckle escaping his lips. "You don't need to thank me, man. I just said what I believe. You're the one who did the work. You took responsibility. That's real growth. Keep doing that and you'll be all right." They sat in silence for a moment, two men from very different worlds, yet both connected by the same journey of understanding and change. After their meeting at the diner, the taxi driver, whose name, as it turned out, was James, became somewhat of a local hero. His public apology had resonated deeply with many people, especially those who had witnessed the change in him firsthand. The conversation had sparked not just conversations in the media, but in local communities too. People were reaching out to him, asking for advice, thanking him for showing them that change was possible. For James, the transformation was profound. He had spent his entire life harboring a deep-rooted bitterness, a product of growing up in a world that had often looked down on him. But he had started to realize that, like everyone else, he was a work in progress. And change, real change, was something he could pursue, even if it felt uncomfortable. It was clear that Snoop's words had been the catalyst for his transformation. James couldn't stop thinking about how Snoop had handled the entire situation with such grace and wisdom. He had expected the rapper to get angry or defensive, to fight back with insults or condescension. But instead, Snoop had offered him a perspective that made him rethink everything. It wasn't just about admitting fault, it was about growing from it, actively choosing to be better, to treat others with kindness, no matter their background. As James reflected on the changes within him, he found himself questioning his past, the things he had believed for so long. For so many years, he'd carried around anger that he hadn't even known how to process. It had been his armor, his way of coping with a world that had never been kind to him. But Snoop had shown him that there was a different way to move through the world. A way of understanding, of empathy, and of facing your flaws without letting them control you. Meanwhile, Snoop went about his day, continuing his work and staying focused on his own projects. The fame was nothing new to him, and the public response to the situation was just part of the package. But, like he had always done, he took moments to reflect on the impact of his actions. And the more he thought about it, the more he realized how small moments like this, these exchanges with people who didn't expect to be challenged, were often the most profound. He had learned over the years that real change didn't come from grand gestures or flashy headlines. It came from conversations, from listening, from understanding each other, even when the world said you shouldn't. That was why he didn't hesitate to step into the situation when the driver had started ranting. It was about showing people that they didn't have to live in anger. They didn't have to stay stuck in the narratives they had built around themselves. The media attention surrounding the incident had slowed, but Snoop's impact on James' life continued to grow. Over the next few weeks, Snoop kept tabs on how things were going. He saw that James was actively participating in community events, reaching out to people from all walks of life, and even attending diversity workshops to better understand the people he had once judged. Snoop couldn't help but feel a sense of pride for the driver. He wasn't just apologizing for his actions, he was doing the hard work to change himself. He was becoming the kind of person who inspired others to reflect on their own behavior and beliefs. One evening, as Snoop was wrapping up his latest project, his phone buzzed with a new message. He unlocked it and smiled when he saw it was from James. "Snoop, man, I just wanted to thank you again. You've helped me see a whole new side of things. I'm starting a community event next month, and I'd love for you to come. I can't do this without you being there." Snoop chuckled to himself, his fingers quickly typing a response. "I'm proud of you, James. You're doing the work. I'd be honored to come. Just let me know the details and I'll be there." He set the phone down and leaned back in his chair, feeling good about the direction his life was taking. This wasn't just about fame, music, or business. It was about making a difference. It was about leaving a legacy of understanding, of teaching others that no one was defined by their worst moments. Everyone had the potential to change, to grow, and to become better versions of themselves. The day of the event came quickly. It was held in a community center in one of the city's more diverse neighborhoods. James had worked tirelessly to organize it, reaching out to local leaders, activists, and even former critics. He had turned his life around, and now he was using his experience to bring people together. When Snoop arrived, he was greeted with applause, but James, standing at the front of the room, was the real star of the day. He had made something out of nothing, building bridges instead of walls. He had shown people that they could evolve, that they didn't have to remain stuck in their past mistakes. Snoop walked up to the front, shaking James' hand firmly. "You did it, man. You turned it around." James smiled, his eyes shining with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you, Snoop. You're the reason I'm here, why I'm doing all this. You helped me find the courage to face myself, to apologize, and to be better. And I'm gonna keep doing that, for the rest of my life." Snoop stood back and watched as James took the microphone, speaking to the crowd about his journey, about how he had once been full of hate, but had now found a way to embrace love, understanding, and change. His words resonated deeply with everyone in the room. This wasn't just a speech, it was a testament to the power of redemption, to the idea that even the most stubborn hearts could be softened with enough compassion and empathy. The event went on to raise thousands of dollars for local charities focused on education, diversity, and anti-racism initiatives. It was a moment that marked a turning point not just in James' life, but in the lives of those who had witnessed his transformation. As the event wrapped up, James found Snoop standing off to the side, taking a quiet moment to reflect on everything that had happened. "You did more than just change me, Snoop," James said as he approached. "You changed this whole community." Snoop smiled, his voice low and humble. "I didn't do it, James. You did. I just helped you see it. You took the steps. Now, it's up to you to keep walking." James nodded, his heart full. "I'm walking, Snoop. And I'll make sure I never stop." As Snoop left the event, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This was what life was really about, helping others to see the best in themselves, even when they didn't think it was possible. It wasn't about being famous or successful. It was about creating change, one person at a time. As the city lights twinkled in the distance, Snoop reflected on the journey. The taxi driver who had once filled his ride with venom had now become a symbol of redemption. A man who had once harbored hate had transformed, not just in his own eyes, but in the eyes of everyone who had witnessed his change. And that was the real victory. After the successful charity event, James felt more than just a sense of accomplishment. He felt like a different person entirely. He had spent years harboring grudges and bitterness, but now, as he stood in front of a crowd of people who had come to hear him speak, he felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility. He had given the people a story of redemption, and now it was up to him to keep living that truth. As he spoke to the crowd, thanking everyone for their contributions, James reflected on the journey that had brought him here. Snoop had been the catalyst, but it was James who had taken the step forward. He had listened to the advice and accepted the challenge of change. And now, he was ready to keep that momentum going. "I know what it's like to feel stuck in your ways, to think that who you were is who you'll always be," James said, his voice steady but powerful. "But let me tell you, change is possible. No one is ever too far gone. It's about taking that first step, owning up to your mistakes, and finding the courage to move forward." The crowd applauded, and for the first time in a long time, James felt validated, not just by others, but by himself. He wasn't just speaking words anymore, he was living them. He had apologized to Snoop, and now he was working on making a real difference in his own community. Snoop, meanwhile, had been keeping a close eye on James. He had seen the driver's transformation up close, and it wasn't lost on him how far James had come. But what Snoop also knew was that this kind of change wasn't easy. People often struggled with the idea of facing their past, of admitting where they had been wrong. But Snoop had learned over the years that the best way to inspire change wasn't through words alone, it was through actions. Snoop had been to many charity events in the past, but this one felt different. James had put in the work, and now he was not just a participant in the event, he was the heart of it. Snoop watched from the back, quietly taking in the atmosphere. He could see the respect in the room for James. It was evident in the way people looked at him, no longer as the angry, resentful man who had lashed out in the past, but as someone who had taken responsibility for his actions and was using that responsibility to fuel change. As Snoop mingled with the crowd, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride for the work James was doing. The message of redemption was powerful, and Snoop had been a part of that journey. But he knew that James wasn't just doing it for the accolades. He was doing it because he genuinely wanted to make a difference. The event continued to grow in popularity, with more and more people coming to hear James speak about his journey. What started as a small gathering had turned into a larger movement, with other people in the community reaching out to James for guidance. It wasn't just about charity, it was about healing, about bridging divides that had existed for far too long. Despite his success, James knew that redemption wasn't a destination, it was a lifelong journey. He still had work to do, and he wasn't under any illusions about that. It was easy to speak about change, but living it every day was a different story. James had started visiting schools, talking to young people about the dangers of hate and prejudice, about how easy it was to fall into patterns of judgment without truly understanding people. But the work was difficult. Some of the people he encountered were skeptical of his message. They couldn't understand how someone like James, who had been so openly racist in the past, could suddenly be trusted to lead a movement of unity. There were moments when James felt like giving up. He questioned whether the people who had heard his story would really believe that he had changed. He wasn't a perfect man, and he didn't expect everyone to accept him right away. But the doubts still crept in. One afternoon, after a particularly hard meeting with some local leaders, James found himself sitting on a park bench, his head in his hands. He had tried so hard to make amends, but there were days when it felt like his past was too much to overcome. That's when his phone buzzed. It was a message from Snoop. "Keep going, James. Change is never easy, but it's always worth it. The people who matter will see it. The rest? They'll catch up in time." James smiled softly at the message, feeling a surge of motivation wash over him. Snoop had been through his own struggles, and if Snoop could face the challenges of the world with that much grace, then so could he. He wasn't going to stop now, not when he had come this far. A few months after that tough day, James received an unexpected invitation. Snoop, knowing how much work James had put into his mission, invited him to collaborate on a larger community project. It was one thing for James to work alone, but with Snoop by his side, they could create an even bigger impact. The two men, now united in their vision for change, decided to partner up on a massive event that would bring people together, regardless of their backgrounds. The event was to be held in a central park, a space where people from all walks of life could come together. They planned for live music, food vendors, speeches, and community-building activities that focused on unity, understanding, and the importance of breaking down prejudices. When the day of the event arrived, the turnout exceeded all expectations. The park was filled with people from all walks of life, families, students, activists, and leaders, all united in the common goal of fostering understanding and breaking down barriers. Snoop performed, as always, with an energy that was impossible to ignore. But it wasn't just the music that had everyone talking, it was the message behind it. James stood beside Snoop as they addressed the crowd together, his voice strong and steady. He spoke not just of his mistakes, but of how those mistakes had shaped him into the man he was today. He talked about the work he had done to make amends, about how the path to redemption was full of challenges but worth every step. The crowd responded with a standing ovation. James had made it. He wasn't just the man who had once been filled with hate. He was now a symbol of change, proof that people could change if they chose to. As the event came to a close, Snoop walked up to James, a proud smile on his face. "You did it, man. You've turned this around. I knew you had it in you." James, feeling the weight of everything he had accomplished, nodded. "We did it, Snoop. You were there every step of the way. I couldn't have done it without you." Snoop placed a hand on James' shoulder, his voice quiet but full of meaning. "This is just the beginning, man. The world's gonna change, one person at a time." James looked out at the crowd, the people still buzzing with energy from the event, and he knew that Snoop was right. This was just the beginning. There was still work to be done, but together, they had shown that change was possible. And if they could do it, anyone could. As the weeks passed after the event in the park, James and Snoop found themselves constantly in motion, the momentum of their work driving them forward. What had begun as a small charity event had now evolved into a powerful movement that was spreading across the city. The message was simple yet profound. Change was possible. Redemption wasn't just an idea, it was something that could be lived. James had become a figurehead of this movement, but he never saw it that way. He didn't want to be treated like a celebrity or a savior. He just wanted to continue his work of rebuilding trust and breaking down the walls of hate that had been built around him. He worked with Snoop on community initiatives, organizing food drives, anti-racism workshops, and mentorship programs aimed at helping the youth of the city. The impact was immediate. People who had once been skeptical of James started seeing him in a different light. It wasn't just that he was apologizing, it was that he was walking the walk. He was showing up for his community, day in and day out, making a tangible difference. Snoop, as always, remained a quiet partner in the background, supporting James' initiatives and offering his influence to elevate the message. He wasn't interested in being in the spotlight, he was there because he believed in the cause. Snoop's involvement, however, was the spark that helped ignite the fire of change. His reputation as an artist, philanthropist, and advocate for social justice added credibility to James' work, helping to open doors and create partnerships with local leaders and organizations. Together, they started reaching more people, pulling in those who had been on the fringes of society, those who had felt ignored, alienated, or disenfranchised. Their efforts weren't about politics or gaining fame, they were about building bridges where none had existed before. And it was working. However, no story of change is complete without resistance. As much as James and Snoop had built, there were those who felt threatened by their message. There were still people in the city who clung to their outdated prejudices, who refused to believe that someone like James could ever truly change. They couldn't fathom the idea that a man who had once spewed hate could now be an agent of peace. It started with small incidents. A few negative comments in the media, anonymous messages on social media pages, and whispers among the more entrenched members of the community. These were the people who saw James' transformation as a weakness, who didn't believe in second chances or redemption. They wanted him to stay in the box they had created for him, the box of hate and ignorance. And when they saw him stepping out of that box, they pushed back. One evening, after a particularly successful community outreach event, James received a phone call that made his stomach drop. His wife, Emily, told him that their house had been vandalized. Messages of hate were scrawled across the front door and windows, things that no one should ever have to read. It was a stark reminder that, despite the progress he had made, there were still people who would never accept him for who he was becoming. When Snoop heard about the incident, he called James immediately. "Don't let this stop you, James. They want you to feel like you don't belong. But you belong. And the work you're doing? It's changing lives." James sat quietly for a moment before responding. "I won't stop, Snoop. But I'll admit it stings. After everything I've done, it's hard to accept that some people still see me as that guy. I don't know how to get past that." Snoop paused, his voice gentle but firm. "You can't let them dictate your path. They want you to go backward, but you're moving forward. And that's what matters. Keep doing what you're doing. The right people see it." James nodded, his heart heavy but his resolve growing stronger. "You're right. This doesn't change anything. It just makes me want to work harder." The next few days were tough for James. The vandalism was just the tip of the iceberg. He found himself dealing with people who would question his sincerity at every turn. Some of the people who had supported him at first now started to question his motives, wondering if he had truly changed or if he was simply using his redemption story as a way to gain sympathy. But through it all, James kept moving forward. The support from Snoop, his family, and the community members who truly believed in his work kept him grounded. He knew the resistance wasn't going to disappear overnight, but he had already come too far to back down. To prove his commitment, James decided to speak out. He stood at the front of the same community center where he had first shared his story and, for the first time, addressed his critics directly. The room was packed with people from all walks of life, some supportive, some skeptical. "I know some of you don't believe in me," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I know some of you think that I haven't really changed, and that's okay. I've been where you are, full of doubt and uncertainty. I've seen my share of mistakes and regrets, and I know it's hard to trust someone who's been as wrong as I've been." He paused, letting his words sink in. His eyes scanned the room, landing on people who had once harbored resentment, those who still looked at him with suspicion. "But here's what I want to say," he continued, his voice unwavering. "I'm not perfect. I never will be. But I'm trying. I've spent a lifetime getting things wrong. But the difference now is that I'm doing everything I can to make it right. I'm here because I believe that everyone deserves a chance to grow. And if you're willing to give me a chance, I promise I'll keep showing up every single day." The room was silent for a moment. James could feel the weight of the skepticism around him. But then, slowly, a few people in the crowd began to clap. It wasn't a huge applause at first, just a few tentative claps. But as James stood there, waiting, more people joined in. By the end of his speech, the entire room was on their feet, applauding. It wasn't about forgiveness in that moment. It was about understanding. The people in that room knew that change was hard. It was a long, difficult journey, but seeing James standing there, speaking from the heart, they could see that he was genuine. And in that genuine effort, they began to see something they hadn't seen before, the possibility of redemption. As the weeks turned into months, the challenges James faced didn't stop, but neither did his work. Every time the negative comments or resistance came, he faced them with the same strength he had gained from Snoop's encouragement. But now, he wasn't just working for himself. He was working for those who had started to believe in him, for those who hadn't yet seen that change was possible. James knew that the hardest work was yet to come. He needed to extend his hand to more people who were struggling, who were carrying their own hate and misconceptions, just as he had. He knew that to make a real difference, he couldn't just be a figurehead. He had to get his hands dirty. He had to be in the trenches with the people who were in pain, struggling to break free from their own prejudices. Snoop, as always, remained by his side. He wasn't in the spotlight, but his influence was clear. He helped James organize workshops and community-building events, where people could come together to talk openly about their biases, their struggles, and their hopes for the future. It wasn't about pretending the problems didn't exist. It was about facing them head-on, acknowledging them, and working together to find solutions. One afternoon, at a community gathering, James stood in front of a group of young people, some from his own neighborhood, some from outside the city, all from different backgrounds. He had spent the past few weeks working with them, helping them understand the power of empathy and the importance of standing up to hate, even when it feels like the whole world is against you. "Look, I get it," James said, addressing the young faces in front of him. "I was just like you once. Angry, confused, and thinking that the only way to survive was to keep people at arm's length. But that's not how you win. You win by reaching out, by understanding each other. It's hard, but it's worth it." The room was quiet, but James could see the wheels turning in their minds. This wasn't just another speech. It was a moment of change. They were listening, and for the first time in a long time, James felt like his work was truly making an impact. Months passed, and the work continued. The community that James and Snoop had built was stronger than ever. It wasn't just about the events they were putting on or the programs they were running, it was about the shift in mindset that was taking place. People were beginning to see each other not as strangers, but as equals. They were talking more openly about their biases, their fears, and the things that divided them. James had started seeing young people, people who had once been filled with anger and resentment, coming to him for advice. They had seen his transformation, and now they were ready to make their own. He had become a mentor to them, guiding them through their struggles and helping them find their own path to change. Snoop, too, had seen the impact of their work. He wasn't just an entertainer anymore. He had become a symbol of the possibility of redemption. He used his influence to further the cause, making sure that the message of unity and understanding spread to even more people. He had always been someone who believed in the power of change, but now, as he looked around at the community they had built, he knew that the work they were doing was something bigger than either of them. One day, as they stood together at a local rally, James turned to Snoop, a smile spreading across his face. "We did it, man. Look at this. Look at all these people." Snoop smiled back, his eyes gleaming with pride. "Nah, man. You did it. You put in the work. I'm just glad I could be part of it." James laughed. "Yeah, but you showed me how to keep pushing even when it seemed impossible. You showed me that change is never easy, but it's always worth it." The crowd roared with applause, but James didn't need that validation anymore. He had found something deeper, a sense of purpose. He was no longer the man who had made mistakes. He was the man who had learned from them, grown from them, and helped others do the same. As Snoop and James looked out at the sea of people in front of them, they knew that their work was far from over. But the foundation had been laid. The future was bright, and the message was clear: change was possible for anyone who was willing to try.